Welcome to the monthly vinyl voyage. In September 2022, I started an experiment, building myself a new music collection from scratch at a rate of no more than one album a month. Coming up on 3 years later, it's formed a few dozen great albums, and I'm taking a bit of time to look at each of these purchases, to learn more about it and to reflect on what it means to me, and to digress onto side notes that I find interesting. In this episode, I'm going to talk about my record of the month from April 2023, album number 6 in my collection, and it's Queen, Greatest Hits. Now, I should mention that I'm recording these episodes out of chronological order, so while this was my April 2023 purchase, I'm actually recording this late in 2025. And that timing is deliberate, because October the 31st, 2025 marked 50 years since Bohemian Rhapsody was first released as a single. 50 years, half a century since one of the most ambitious, ridiculous, brilliant pieces of pop music ever committed to tape hit the world and proceeded to break every rule about what a hit single was supposed to be. So let's talk about that song first, and then we'll get into why Greatest Hits exists at all and what it means to me. Bohemian Rhapsody shouldn't have worked. I mean that quite literally. The music industry executives at the time told Queen it wouldn't work. At 5 minutes and 55 seconds, it was far too long for radio play. It had no chorus, and it careened wildly between piano ballad, an operatic middle section with layered harmonies singing about Scaramouche and Galileo and Beelzebub, and then a hard rock segment, and then a gentle coda. It was, by any conventional measure, commercial suicide. The song was Freddie Mercury's vision entirely. Brian May said that Freddie had the whole thing, every harmony and transition, all worked out in his head before they even started recording. Mercury conceived it as 3 separate songs that he wanted to stitch together into what he called a mock opera, and he refused to explain what it meant. When pressed about the lyrics, about the "Mama just killed a man" confession and the nihilistic "nothing really matters" conclusion, he'd simply say that it was about relationships. I'll leave it at that. The recording process was insane. This was 1975, so they were working with 24-track analogue tape. To achieve the sound that Freddie wanted, particularly for the operatic middle section, they had to keep overdubbing vocals and then bouncing them down to new tape to free up tracks for more overdubs. They ended up with about 180 separate vocal tracks layered on top of each other, working across 5 different studios between August and September of that year. Producer Ray Thomas Baker recalled that every time Freddie came up with another Galileo, he'd add another piece of tape to the reel. By the end, they were working with 8th generation tape, each bounce degrading the sound quality slightly. But the sheer density of the harmonies make up for that. And then came the question of how to release it. The record company just flat out said no. Radio stations wouldn't play it. It was too long, too weird, too everything. But Queen and their management were clever about it. They gave a copy to Kenny Everett, a British radio DJ and a friend of the band, with strict instructions not to play it. Of course, Everett ignored this completely. He played it 14 times in 2 days, and the phone lines lit up. People were demanding to hear this strange, sprawling epic. The record company's hand was forced. When Bohemian Rhapsody was released on October 31st, 1975, it shot to number 1 in the UK and stayed there for 9 weeks. It became the UK Christmas number 1. In the US, it reached number 9, respectable, but not the phenomenon it was in Britain. The promotional video they made filmed because they didn't want to mime the complex song on Top of the Pops, is widely credited as one of the first modern music videos, helping to launch what would become the MTV era. Critics were baffled. One review in Melody Maker called it a superficially impressive pastiche of incongruous musical styles and compared it to a theatrical society performing The Pirates of Penzance. Another said it had scarcely a shred of tune and was an exercise in eccentric over-elaboration. But even as they struggled to understand it, most acknowledged that it was likely to be a hit of enormous proportions. And that they were right about. That brings us to Greatest Hits, released October 26th, 1981. Now, as well as it being the year I was born, 1981 was also a significant year for Queen. It marked a decade since their final lineup had come together in 1971, and it was the first year they hadn't released a new studio album. So the timing was perfect for a compilation, a chance to consolidate their success, to create a snapshot of everything they'd achieved through the 1970s, and to introduce new listeners to the band, and let's be honest, make a substantial amount of money. The UK edition of Greatest Hits was put together with very specific criteria. It only included singles that had reached the top 20 in the UK chart, plus We Will Rock You, which had originally been a B-side. Brian May said the selection process was easy because all the tracks were gold-plated chart material. Because here's the thing about Queen. They were both blessed and cursed by having many more ideas than any single album could contain. They'd put glam rock next to music hall pastiche, next to hard rock, next to opera, next to disco, sometimes even within the same song. Their studio albums could be brilliant and bewildering in equal measure. For every Bohemian Rhapsody, there was a Seaside Rendezvous or Good Company, tracks that were charming or interesting but decidedly odd. Critics often noted that Queen albums were wildly inconsistent. But Greatest Hits solved that problem. It gave you all the peaks without any of the peculiar valley tracks. It was Queen distilled down to their most accessible, most successful selves. And because the compilation focused only on singles, it inevitably glossed over the deep album cuts, the experimental tracks, the quirky moments that some fans loved. Brian May's Brighton Rock, Freddie Mercury's Death on Two Legs, and May's sci-fi folk tune 39. The result was an album that became, and I need to emphasise this, the best-selling album of all time in the United Kingdom. Not just a successful compilation, not just a chart topper, the actual certified, undisputed best-selling album in UK history. By 2022, it had sold 7 million copies in the UK alone, and as of late 2025, it's spent over 1,178 weeks on the UK album chart. It's astonishing. 1 in 4 households in the UK has this album. The album came out as part of a multimedia package. There was also a Greatest Flicks, which was a VHS compilation of their music videos, and Greatest Pics, a photo book. It was a comprehensive celebration of Queen's first decade, and it cemented their legacy for generations who hadn't experienced the 1970s output firsthand. As part of my research, I bought a copy of Queen's Greatest Pics, and judged in today's internet world, it's just a fairly underwhelming collection of photos. You'd have to be quite a fan to consider this a coffee table book nowadays, although I have no idea how exciting this was in the world of 1981. The book contains interviews with people who toured with them or part of their entourage. I don't really have much to say about it, so I'm just going to finish flicking through before I carry on. Now, I want to take a moment to talk about something remarkable about Queen's career. They've had multiple distinct waves of popularity, separated by years, sometimes decades. Most bands get one shot at the top. Queen has had at least four. We've already talked about the first wave, the 1970s, when they rose from progressive rock hopefuls to become one of the biggest bands in the world. Bohemian Rhapsody in 1975, A Day at the Races at 1976, then News of the World in 1977 with We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions. These were massive, era-defining hits. In the UK and Europe, they were absolutely huge, arguably bigger than Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd. In the US, they were successful, strong album sales, hit singles, but not quite the same stratospheric level. The second wave was the Greatest Hits compilation itself in 1981, which introduced a whole new generation to the band's music and kept them prominent throughout the 1980s. But here's where it gets really interesting. By the early 1990s, Queen's success in the United States had waned. They hadn't had a hit since 1984. Bohemian Rhapsody was considered a forgotten song on American radio, nothing like the anthem status it still held in Britain. And then Freddie Mercury died in November 1991. The band re-released Bohemian Rhapsody as a double A-side with These Are the Days of Our Lives, and it shot back to number one in the UK for 5 weeks. It became the only single in history to be the UK Christmas number one twice with the same version. But the real American revival came from an unexpected source. Wayne's World, Wayne's World, Wayne's World. Mike Myers grew up in Toronto in the 1970s, and for him, Bohemian Rhapsody encapsulated his adolescence. When he wrote Wayne's World, the 1992 film based on his Saturday Night Live sketch, he wanted to include the song in a scene where Wayne and his friends drove around headbanging in the car. You've seen it. The studio didn't want it. They wanted Guns N' Roses, who were huge in 1991. But Myers fought for it. He fought hard. He threatened to quit his own project over having this tune. And the scene is perfect. Wayne and his friends lip sync and headbang through the operatic section and the hard rock climax. And there's something about it. It's both a gentle mockery of the song's theatrical absurdity and a complete and sincere celebration of how fun it is. The whole joke works because the song is inherently ridiculous and inherently brilliant at the same time. With the release of the movie, the impact was immediate. Bohemian Rhapsody re-entered the Billboard Hot 100 after 16 years and reached a new peak of number 2, significantly higher than its original 1976 peak at number 9. The film's soundtrack became a major hit. A new music video was released that mixed footage from Wayne's World with Queen's original video, and it won Queen their only MTV Music Video Award for Best Video from a Film in 1992. For an entire generation of Americans, people who were teenagers and young adults in the 90s, Wayne's World was their introduction to Queen. Adam Lambert, who toured with Brian May and Roger Taylor as Queen Plus, says he was 10 years old when he saw that car scene and asked his father, "What song was that?" A slightly heartbreaking part of this story. Brian May knew how important the Wayne's World revival could be. He got an advance tape of the film and took it to Freddie Mercury. He was very ill at the time. May played him the car scene, and Freddie, despite being weak, watched it and laughed and laughed. May said Freddie loved it and smiled and said, "Yeah, how wonderful is that?" So May is sure that Freddie understood what that scene meant, that it represented a rebirth for Queen in America, a whole new generation discovering their music. There's a lovely full circle moment in the 2018 Bohemian Rhapsody biopic. Mike Myers appears in the film as a fictional record executive who dismisses Bohemian Rhapsody as a single, insisting it's not a song that teenagers can crank up the volume in their car and bang their heads to. The irony is delicious, if a little on the nose. And now we're in a fourth wave. Following the success of the 2018 biopic, Bohemian Rhapsody became the most streamed song from the 20th century. As of late 2025, it's nearing 3 billion streams on Spotify and 2 billion views on YouTube. For the song's 50th anniversary, there's been a special vinyl reissue with gold labels, a new orchestral arrangement performed at the last night of the Proms with Brian May and Roger Taylor, and a 5-part YouTube documentary series about the track and A Night at the Opera. It's extraordinary, really. Most songs, even massive hits, have a shelf life. They belong to a particular moment, a particular generation. Bohemian Rhapsody has belonged to multiple generations, across 5 decades, in multiple countries, revived by a pop film, a biopic, and now the streaming era. It's been called future-proof, walled off from changing tastes because its singular strangeness somehow makes it timeless. So what does greatest hits mean to me personally? Well, I'm a part of the Wayne's World generation, I suppose. I was 10 when Freddie died and 11 when Wayne's World came out in 1992. I don't remember the first time I watched Wayne's World. I just remember watching it a lot, probably on VHS. I remember not recognising most of the famous cameos, but I definitely remember the car scene. The other Queen moment I remember from my childhood was watching the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, the opening ceremony on a tiny television. Freddie had recorded Barcelona with the opera singer Montserrat Cabell, I'm sorry if I butchered that. And even though he'd died the previous November, his voice soared over the ceremony. I was 11 and I remember being struck by how powerful that was. I didn't really know Queen properly until much later. In 6th form, I'd go to 2 pubs in Cambridge with friends after college, the Earl of Derby and the Rock. We'd play pool and the jukebox would rotate through the same handful of songs most nights, which would include Bohemian Rhapsody, Another One Bites the Dust and We Are the Champions. These were communal songs, the kind everyone knew, the kind that soundtracked 1,000 pub nights across Britain. Then at the University of Nottingham, this would have been 2001, so all this music was already 20 years old. I lived in a shared flat with my housemate Jeff, and Jeff had the Greatest Hits 1, 2, 3 CD box set. I was studying computer science, spending long hours coding, and I'd ripped the CDs to MP3 and played them on repeat while I worked. Although I was never really a fan of discs 2 and 3. And here's why that first disc, Greatest Hits 1, worked for me then, and why I've wanted it for my collection now. It's the most approachable Queen album. If you dive into their studio albums, you get the full experience, the weird music hall tracks, the prog epics, the moments of brilliance alongside their moments of what on earth were they thinking? Greatest Hits gives you Queen at their most refined, their most accessible. It's not the full picture, but it's the best introduction. I bought this copy in April 2023 from Revolution Records in Royston. I visit Revolution fairly often when I'm seeing my jam partner Jonathan. We usually have a browse together. Finding an original UK pressing of Greatest Hits isn't difficult. The album sold so many copies that second-hand originals are just everywhere. But that's part of its charm, I think. This is an artefact of just how massive this album was. There's the iconic cover photo, and then inside, the record sleeve itself has information on each of the albums that the tracks are drawn from. On the back here, it actually mentions at the bottom, Greatest Flicks. Queen Greatest Flicks, a video cassette of Queen's films, is now available from video outlets and major record stores. It includes all tracks, except Star, plus 3 extras. The catalogue number, VHS TVD 900542, Betamax TXD 90050444. Now, if you're young, you probably don't know what either VHS or Betamax are. If you're my age, the fact there's a Betamax is funny. The record itself, it's incredibly thin. This was definitely made cheap. Compared to like the collector's edition 180 gram vinyl, this is not that. What's to love about Greatest Hits? Well, it's a masterclass in how to assemble a compilation. The sequencing is thoughtful, the track selection is impeccable for what it's trying to achieve, and it showcases Queen's versatility. You get a bit of opera, rock, disco funk, music hall, arena anthems, rockabilly, all from one band and brilliantly executed. You could say Bohemian Rhapsody alone justifies this album's existence. Beyond that, this compilation captures Queen at their peak. Their late 70s period where they could seemingly do no commercial wrong. There are songs that have soundtracked sports victories, pub nights, car journeys, films and lives for half a century now. What might be missing? Well, if you want the full Queen experience, the deep cuts, the experimental tracks, the moments where they took risks that didn't quite pay off, you won't find them here. This is Queen as crowd pleasers, not Queen as artists pushing boundaries on album tracks. Now, the US edition had a different track listing, swapping out songs like Don't Stop Me Now, Save Me and Good Old Fashioned Loverboy for Under Pressure and Keep Yourself Alive. Each market, in fact, got the hits that have worked best there, which makes sense commercially, but means there's no definitive version of this album. And of course, this only covers up to 1980, so you miss their entire 80s output. Radio Gaga, I Want to Break Free, One Vision, The Show Must Go On. But that's what Greatest Hits 2 is for, I suppose. I think Under Pressure is a great track, and I wouldn't mind owning a copy with that on it too. To celebrate the 50th anniversary, there is a new 2025 UK limited edition 17-track double album. It's pressed on 180 gram vinyl and it was half-speed mastered from Lacquer's cut at Abbey Road Studios. If that had had Under Pressure on it, I would definitely have bought it, but unfortunately it doesn't. It's the UK listings, not the Americans. So I will keep waiting for that definitive version. As for what else is missing, well, this isn't the only Queen album in my collection. And next time I will tell you more about that. Greatest Hits is a perfect time capsule of Queen's imperial phase, assembled with care, released at the right moment, and embraced by generations of listeners who just wanted to hear the hits without the filler. It's not the whole story, but it's the best chapter. And Bohemian Rhapsody, 50 years old, remains one of the most audacious, ridiculous, brilliant pieces of pop music ever recorded. The fact that it was a hit in 1975, 1981, 1992, 2018 and 2025 tells you everything you need to know about its enduring power. I'm sure I've made mistakes in my research. There's so much written about Queen that contradicting sources abound, but I hope I've captured something of what makes this album and this band special to me. Thank you for listening to The Monthly Vinyl Voyage, and I will see you next time.